agreeing how important the Kurdish Peshmerga Iraqis are, and as such good allies for us, our best Muslim allies. And while I was there, I saw some of the captured ISIS equipment. That's the colonel who gave me, this is all ISIS equipment. And this is my first view of ISIS, which was down a little hill below us where they would come out. And I also got a chance to meet with the rescued Yazidis. If everybody remembers, the Yazidis were taken over by ISIS. This is actually, these pictures I'm allowed to use, a young woman I met who was rescued from ISIS. And this is where the Office of the Rescued Yazidi Abductees, where the work is being done for future war crimes. This is another young woman who was rescued from ISIS. And these are all young people who were rescued from ISIS, and that's the mother. They all were taken and now we're back. Other places I've been on Israel's northern border. I work with a wonderful think tank there called Alma. This is on the left, you can see the Hezbollah tunnel, the largest of their tunnels that was 25 stories deep underground. And you can see right above it, you have the UN base, one of their outposts, which had no idea for 2 years they were digging underground. Very sophisticated, you have an idea. This is how they excavated, and this is the air conditioning system and the compressors that were built in. That's Hezbollah on the border and the faithful Israeli Tzahal IDF troop at the border. I've also been in Ramallah, meeting with the PLO, meeting with Fatah. I was able the last time to go in with international lawyers, this group in the PLO offices, through my friend Yitzhak Sokolov, who I run my seminars with, and a dear friend. And this was the Palestinian negotiating team. And so I just want to give you an idea of the places I've been. So now I'm going to get into what we want to do. We want to talk about our topic. And so I'm going to start with normalization, and that this is a tectonic shift. So this is a picture on the right of part of my seminar from about 2 years ago when we were in Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, and Dubai. And I brought 3 Israelis who had a dual citizenship, and the people in Abu Dhabi and Bahrain knew that they were Israelis and couldn't have been happier that they were there. So it was no shock to me about normalization happening, that there was a positive attitude to them, but the question was when. So why is normalization a game changer? So first, my friend is Aaron David Miller at the Carnegie Endowment for Peace. And I want to give kudos to Aaron, because Aaron was part of the world, and this is what he said regarding normalization. I've always believed normalized relations between Israel and Arab states would necessarily follow resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian dispute. But this normalization upended American thinking about the centrality of the Israeli-Palestinian dispute, long considered to be the core of the broader conflict. And the fact that he did a mea culpa and saying, I'm now reassessing what went on. But in 2016, we were told by then Secretary of State in his last year, John Kerry, guaranteeing there will be no separate peace between Israel and the Arab world. No, 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 I can tell you that. There'll be no separate peace without the Palestinian process. And there was no mea culpas there. This was just not lack of foresight for part of the last administration. And the Palestinians, when normalization occurred, mimicked the same type of thing. They weren't going to get involved here. That's Abbas in the middle, who we're going to be talking about in a little bit. C. Barakat is to his right, who passed away. He was the chief PLO negotiator. He passed away of COVID in an Israeli hospital a few months ago. But normalization should be great for the Palestinians. It's terrible for the corrupt Palestinian Authority, Hamas, but for the Palestinian people, it really could be a game changer. What the Palestinians need to wake up to is that the Arab world does not consider them a priority. They used to not consider them so much of a priority before, but they said the right things out loud. Now it's almost they really don't care. And the Arab League refused to condemn a single nation for normalizing with Israel a few months ago. So Israel, for normalization, paid a price. And let's look at that. So they gave up 2 things for normalization. One, they did not extend sovereignty or annexation, however you want to define it, into areas that align with the Trump plan. But they also gave up possibly some of their qualitative edge. because they acquiesced to having the United Arab Emirates have F-35 stealth fighters. So these fighters end up in enemy hands? Both Democrats and Republicans, at least on record, support Israel's qualitative edge. It can't have a quantitative edge because it's just too small. We can't afford that. So the qualitative edge is what's allowed Israel to exist. But think about this. With the precedent of selling an F-35, even if the United Arab Emirates is considered safe, the Egyptians may want it, the Jordanians, the Saudis, Qatar. What if any of those countries had? So just as an example, think about Egypt. Egypt, just 7 years ago, 70% of the Egyptian electorate voted for the Muslim Brotherhood and even more extreme Salafists. Can you imagine F-35s in the hands of an Egyptian president like Morsi, the deposed Muslim Brotherhood head of Egypt? By the way, this is not a new problem. Congress had this problem literally 40 years ago, where Ronald Reagan sold a game changer, the AWAC airborne system, to the Saudis. It hurt Israel's qualitative military edge. Congress opposed it, but it still went through. So this is not unprecedented. And there's a couple of Time magazine pictures from the time. So if President Biden, and it's not sure, still sells the F-35s to the United Arab Emirates or someplace else, how could Israel keep its qualitative military edge? So just wanted to mention, Israel has a shopping list of things it's thinking about, and so you can keep it in mind. Things like the F-35B, which is the F-35, but can do vertical takeoffs or land on short runways if Israel is attacked by Iranian missiles and doesn't have runways. And there's one game changer, which is the F-22 Raptor, which is also another stealth aircraft. But what Israel really wants, and I don't think is getting from this administration and didn't get from the last administration, was game changers, which is bunker busting missiles to hit underground Iranian nuclear plants. You can give Israel these missiles, but if it does not have the ability to deliver them, you need a certain aircraft, B-52s, B-2s that Israel does not have. So that would be Israel's request to be able to access that if that was at all possible. So normalization. Everybody says it's very simple. This is all about Iran. But could it possibly be, and these are the 4 countries you can see, UAE, Sudan, Bahrain, and Morocco, could it be something beyond that? So the naysayers have said normalization is only transactional, just like everything else President Trump did, which was simply transactional. But when one thinks about it, all diplomatic relationships are transactional. There's always an expectation that both sides are going to prosper. The one exception we need to think about was really when Harry Truman recognized Israel in 1948. There really wasn't something in it for the United States, unless somebody looks purely politically, because the State Department was totally against it because of Arab oil. So why are Muslim nations normalizing? Well, it's certainly about Iran, that they would like to be attached at the hip to Israel for defense and intelligence. They know that America is leaving the region. They want to join Muslim nations that are looking beyond their oil wealth, natural gas wealth, for an economic advantage by joining a first world country like Israel, first world country. And also they believe, because many of these countries like the Saudis have been on the outs or will be out on the outs of the Biden administration, especially after the Khashoggi affair from, I guess it's 2 years ago now, is that it may be by advancing normalization, they think that they could help their relationship with America. Which brings us back to the Saudis, who were the ones that told the UAE and other countries that they could make peace with Israel. But this is MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, who's the de facto leader. The word is that until his ailing father dies, there won't be normalization. Many people have speculated that they have been holding out because they can use this as a carrot for rapprochement with the Biden administration. But the real question is this, remember, it wasn't that long ago that the Saudis were the funders of so much terrorism in the world. So can this conservative Wahhabi monarchy make this bold leap and actually recognize and have diplomatic relations with Israel? I think it's more likely than not. But the real normalization that needs to come are about 2 countries Israel has peace with, cold peace. That's Egypt and Jordan. I'm actually writing a paper now with an Egyptian professor about trying to figure out some way to get the people-to-people type of interchange between Israelis and Jordanians, Israelis and Egyptians, like is happening with the Gulf state peoples who are coming to each other's countries. But Egypt and Jordan really, for their own self-interest, need to end their anti-Jewish rhetoric in their media, schools, mosque, government. And this will take leadership from the new Biden administration. But normalization, these normalizations that have occurred, they must be nurtured. And the success of them happening right now, we may look back in retrospect and say that they weren't taken care of and they fell apart. We want, and we should as an American objective, grow these relationships for regional stability, and it's in our interests. So the question is, will this administration that's coming in tomorrow value the importance of the administration, or because it was considered a crowning achievement of the last administration, and you know the animosity, I don't need to tell anybody, that not sidelining the importance of it because it was from the last administration. So I say, and what I will say when I eventually get back to Congress is, if America wants to pivot east and deal with China as its priority, remove or minimize its Middle East footprint, normalization should be a huge part of what we do. Which brings us to the United States-Israel relationship. How or will it change under President Biden? So let's just take one step back. Why is Israel important for America? It's a two-way relationship. It's unrivaled intelligence. It's a reliable ally, the most important ally, and we share values. There's a deep water port in Haifa that our Sixth Fleet goes into. We support NATO operations. Israel supports NATO operations, and research and development in Israel helps save American lives and advances our military. And most recently, something Israel's wanted for a long time, just in the last couple of weeks, Israel was finally made part of Middle East Central Command of the United States in the Gulf. For years, it was not allowed to be there, even though it belonged there because it's in the Middle East and was part of the European CENTCOM, because Arab countries objected. But now with Israel having normalization, Israel is now part of the Midi CENTCOM, and I hope that the Biden administration leaves it as such. But the relationship between US and Israel will be tested by the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So the good news of normalization was it relieved stress number one, which was Israel extending sovereignty into the Jordan River Valley and basically retaining approximately 30% of the West Bank or Judea and Samaria. These, by the way, are some pictures of what a future Palestinian state and a future state of Israel would look like under the infamous Trump plan. But recently, again, in the last week or two, Bibi Netanyahu has offered new settlement homes, which is definitely going to be very upsetting for the incoming Biden administration. One thing people forget about President Biden, for all his years as chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, going back 30 plus years, he's been a fierce critic of any settlement building. So this week, Bibi, who's the great politician, switched gears. And he's now angering his base in the right, and he's okaying or certainly looking into Palestinian building in areas that, quote, according to Oslo, are not Area C, that they're not entitled to. And just this picture here is Ra'abi, which is right near, this is a place my seminar went a few years ago, which is a brand new Palestinian city that's a beacon for them of what they're capable of doing if they take advantage of normalization. So Israel, and this is where a confrontation can occur in the next few years with the Biden administration, Israel, for normalization, only agreed to suspend annexation for 3 years. So how would President Biden respond if Israel annexed the Jordan Valley during his term? This all started when Secretary of State Pompeo, in the last couple of years, announced that Israeli settlements are not illegal per se, and it touched off a firestorm between Democrats and Republicans. So I just want to go through a couple of slides just to remind people of international law that hopefully is clear and I think objective and in context, but in our hyperpolarized world, nothing is. So the questions I want that you should ask yourself is, does Israel have any legal rights over the 67 line, which is also called the Green Line or the 1949 Armistice Line? Or is every Israeli settlement over the 67 line, including the Western Wall, is this a violation of international law that it occurred during UN Security Council Resolution 2334, when President Biden and John Kerry orchestrated this change that anything over 67 would be basically a war crime. And this really will hurt future negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians. So why does the international community claim this is a violation of international law? It's based upon Article 49 of the 1949 Geneva Convention, which said you cannot deport civilian populations into conquered areas. What makes this a little odious is because Article 49 was specifically, which is now being used against Israel, was actually created in response to what the Nazis did to the Jewish populations in Europe during World War II. Now, Israel's defenders say we have international law on side, and they make three cases. That Article 80 of the UN Charter memorialized saying Israel has a right to a state through the famous Balfour Directive and San Remo League of Nations mandate, and it granted Israel rights, including in contested areas, disputed territories. And what those defenders also say is that the last legal stakeholder of the West Bank was the Ottoman Empire. And it was only briefly claimed by Jordan. Only two countries, Pakistan and United Kingdom, recognized it. And so this area, by true international law, not saying it's wise, but by a true reading of international law, is disputed. And finally, when you read what the authors of the quintessential agreement, Security Council Resolution 242 said, and these were people like Arthur Goldberg, the American ambassador, and Eugene Rostrow, eventually became dean of Yale Law School, is that it was always expected that Israel's 67 lines, 49 armistice lines, were indefensible. And so they were going to be redrawn, and they should not, and there was never an expectation until recently that that was the basis of how this was going to be redrawn for the future. And if anybody really wants to know about the Jordan River Valley, I have this map here. Iran, which is obviously Israel's existential nemesis, controls for all purposes, for all intent and purposes, Iraq, controls Syria, controls Lebanon through Hezbollah, and has eyes on Jordan. And if you look in that bottom left corner at that little white area, that's the West Bank. Can you imagine Iran right on the Jordan River Valley, where you would have in the white there a Palestinian state that could be controlled by Hamas, an ally of Iran. So you can understand why Israel wants the Jordan River Valley. So an underappreciated threat to Israeli security, we're going to be talking about Iran, we're going to be talking about the northern border, is the coming war for the supremacy of who runs the Palestinian Authority. Abbas is an ailing octogenarian, and if he dies or loses the next election, doesn't run in the next election, there could be a war, a civil war that could spill over into Israel. And Hamas would love nothing better than to overthrow the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank as it did in Gaza in 2007. A France 24 AFP article did a look at Palestinian refugee camps. And they are already talking, they're already preparing for a post-Abbas power struggle. And they are claiming that there are more weapons in the Palestinian refugee camp today than there were at the time of the Second Intifada, which means that this can grow out of control in a succession battle for the Palestinians. So who will succeed Abbas if he leaves? And unfortunately, almost all the choices are either corrupt, or there's nepotism or ineptitude. Whatever their platform will be, it will be more maximalistic, and that's going to be saying, basically not conciliatory. That's not how you're going to win the Palestinian Authority election. So will the next person be an Arafat sycophant, somebody from the old guard, or will it move Islamist? And if Hamas wins, that's a nightmare for Israel. This is a picture of Abbas and the current prime minister. 2 years ago, when Abbas looked like he was ailing, one of Israel's leading security writers in the leading daily Derot Notes, Madar Perry, who we met with in one of my seminars a few years ago, wrote, Israel was having influence. Behind the scenes, Israel was very involved finding Abbas's successor, talking with the Palestinian officials and Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and UAE. All the countries in the region, including the Palestinian Authority, are worried about what will happen. And so they will coordinate with Israel, but it's not going to be in public. So I'm going to give you a quick rogues gallery of who's there. So this is the current prime minister. Many in the West like him because he's an economist and he has all the right credentials. He supports boycotting Israel and not coordinating security with the IDF, at least rhetorically. This is probably Israel's favorite. He heads the intelligence service. He works with Israel. This is Maurice Farage. He was actually an assassination attempt was made on him with the last prime minister, Mandel, in Gaza a few years ago. This was the consensus choice when they thought Abbas was going to die. It was Mahmoud Alul, who was the right-hand man for the terrorist Abu Jihad. And he is, I'm not exactly sure where he is for the next one. This is another part of Arafat's old guard, Jibril Rajoud, who was the former head of Palestinian Preventive Services, and now is of the Palestinian Football Association. And you'll say, why the Palestinian Football Association? And the reason is he's as an old timer, he's trying to recruit young people to support him when he makes a move to become a Palestinian Authority president. But the most interesting is probably Mohammed Dalan, who's exiled in Abu Dhabi. And he's actually close with MBZ, the head of the UAE. And supposedly Dalan, the Palestinian, is supportive of the normalization agreement. Some people said he was supportive only to stick a thumb in Abbas's eye. And he's very connected and popular in the refugee camps. And he is a corrupt figure, but Israel may be able to do business with him. But in the last time that there was supposedly going to be Palestinian elections, the winner of the Palestinian polls was Marwan Barghouti, who was serving is still serving 5 consecutive life sentences. He has supposedly in prison made deals with Hamas that their first priority, if he gets out and becomes Palestinian Authority president, is to align their goals to destroy the Jewish state. So in the last week or two, Abbas has called for elections. This alone could set the region on fire. That's the Hamas leader, Sinwar, on your right, and there's Abbas. So Abbas may run for re-election. We don't know. The word is the elections may never happen, but he called for them to lift his statue with President Biden. But the most reliable Palestinian poll organization, Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, says overwhelmingly the Palestinians do not believe either side will accept the result, which means the likelihood of violence following. Which we transition now to probably the biggest issue or the biggest confrontation between the American government and the Israeli government. How will President Biden's administration re-enter the Iran nuclear deal? So Tony Blinken has said that we can re-enter the deal. There'll be no significant amendments before rejoining the agreement. So we can rejoin the agreement if they go back into compliance, and then we will address the significant problems. But yet at the same time, I was watching him today on television, and he was saying that President Biden promises that Iran will not get a nuclear weapon. Those two things, that square peg does not fit into the round hole, because the JCPOA over time will allow Iran to have a nuclear-sized, military-industrial-sized a nuclear program if you go back to the JCPOA the way it is. Robert Malley, who is also one of the negotiators who will likely be added to the Biden administration, he said it's very clear the path forward. Iran goes back full compliance with the JCPOA, and then we immediately remove sanctions. And that's probably what will go on, with a little bit of saying we made a couple of little tweaks in the deal and claim that they're bigger than they are. Iran's goal here is get back to the JCPOA as soon as possible. And it's no doubt that both the National Security Council, the principals that will be in there, including John Kerry, will be a principal in NSC, as will Samantha Power, and many people in the State Department are really people who who've been nominated or dominated by Obama team, including Wendy Sherman as the Deputy Secretary of State, one of the chief negotiators, the lead negotiator in the last deal. But one thing President Biden has promised that the last administration reneged on was the Biden team, and whether they listen or not, has promised that Israel will be consulted beforehand. This was a profound difference from the Obama team that promised Israel that it would be consulted and actually held secret talks and made a deal without ever Israel learning about it, except clandestinely, that with the negotiations, and that's part of the original Obama team there. So I wrote a piece recently, and it was something to politicians. And this is Greg Meeks, who's replacing Elliot Engel on to your left as the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee in the House. And he and Brad Sherman, who are both saying we should go back to the JCPOA right away. And I really, when I work on both sides of the aisle, and I say to people, and this is what I say, is this just a pure reflexively political decision? Or have you thought about it? And so these are some questions, and there's a group of questions that I ask. One is, I would like them to know, do you believe that returning to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, will decrease Iran's hegemonic goals, improve its human rights, curtail its missile development, or decrease its nuclear activity? Because they've been doing so much clandestinely. Or do you believe that offering carrots, such ending its actions, will be reciprocated, knowing that after the last sanctions were given in 2015, Iran increased its malevolent behavior right after? So the question here is, are people really looking at this, or is this just so political because this is part of President Obama's foreign policy legacy, and it was something that President Trump withdrew from? And so the question is, what is best for American national security interests? So on the other side, what is the case for restraint before re-entering the JCPOA? So this is Henry Rome from the Eurasia Group, and this is he was speaking on NPR. He says it's very simple. Iran is making all these provocations. They're escalating their nuclear program now simply for leverage. And that President Biden should realize, in his administration, Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, that the administration has time on its side. It has the economic leverage on its side to renegotiate, not just go back into the JCPOA, because administration is in a strong position to strengthen and lengthen the nuclear deal. One of the people that I speak with often is the former head of Israeli military intelligence, Yossi Kupovasa, and he also said, Iran's in distress. We can exploit this. What his assessment is, and this is probably correct, is that Iran has a stronger hand because it does not believe that the new administration really would put all military options on the table if they get to a threshold. And that does weaken our position. Remember, you need to have in this part of the world respect that you're actually going to act. If you're not going to believe that you're going to be acted, you'll be taken advantage of. Another person, just to talk about restraint, is Ken Pollack, formerly of the Brookings Institute, now American Enterprise Institute. And it's really just about Iran, and I'll call it Iran humility. So we said for many years, I've assured people that's easy to be an expert on Iran because there are only two answers. I don't know, and it depends. Someday, we may learn Iran's true rationale, and it may have nothing to do with anything that the United States or the West believes. And that's the only point I will disagree with him about, because Iran is a revolutionary regime. Its foundational core is revolutionary. And this is not, they act rationally, but in a revolutionary thought process. Now, Henry Kissinger this year said, we should not fool ourselves. I don't believe the Iran deal with so many escape clauses will do anything other than bring nuclear weapons all over the Middle East. Iran can't give up its Islamist imperialism. So there's obviously, I think, a lot of disinformation and people listening in their echo chambers about rejoining the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. So I just want to give you some basics, and then you can do your own research. And I'm happy if you want to reach out to me about for any of this information. So how close is Iran to a nuclear deal? Are they 60 days to a nuclear weapon, 60 days or 2 years? So the first thing I want to disabuse everybody about is that ending the lie that Iran never wanted a nuclear weapon. Israel's stolen archives that it took out of Tehran proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Iran was always about, for decades, making nuclear weapons. This was never about, as they claim, medical isotopes. So just make sure you have a basis of what's going on right now. There are three big parts of components of getting a nuclear weapon. One is enriched 90% uranium. Iran is easily able to do that. You need to be able to deliver the nuclear weapon. Iran can easily do it. It has the most advanced missiles and that can deliver a nuclear weapon. The key is compartmentalization, weaponizing this. So just to show you, you need 250 kilograms of 20% enriched uranium to get 25 kilograms to get to 90%. And Iran is well on its way if it chooses to continue with its advanced centrifuges. But just in the last week or two, Iran has announced, and it's been confirmed by the IAEA, which is the UN body that monitors Iran, that they are now making production of uranium metal, which is for the core of a nuclear warhead. And the Europeans, who have basically been defending Iran, said this week, there is no credible civilian use for this. So this is the first point of confrontation that may be coming with the Biden administration. So this is Imish Yadlin, another top-notch Israeli analyst in military intelligence. And what he says, how do you determine how much time they have? And he says, how much have they been putting into developing fissile material, 90% uranium, and how much are they putting it into weaponizing it? We don't really know that. But we do know what the consensus was in 2014-15 of what should be done for a nuclear agreement. It was dismantle the plutonium reactor in Iraq, dismantle the uranium enrichment sites in Fordo and Natanz, dismantle the Parshin weaponization site, and unrestricted inspection to all sites. 2, 3, and 4 never happened. And 1 is a partial dismantlement of Iraq that can be reassembled in relatively short order. And President Obama had promised in 2013-14 that we'll never accept a deal that doesn't end their program forever. So the flaws of the agreement was that and this is really what we forget about the JCPOA, it was unprecedented. We gave a terror state the right to enrich uranium. Every other state, other than the United States or France or Russia or China, if they want to use civilian nuclear energy, they import it. They don't enrich it. The fact that we gave them in the JCPOA, the last administration gave this to them, was unprecedented, and that was probably one of the most profound wrong things about the JCPOA. And we never were allowed to go to their military sites, which are the most likely place for clandestine activity. So will Israel preemptively strike Iran as it did in 81 and 2007? So when the Ayatollah, the supreme leader, talks about words like the final solution, and his Twitters are always about elimination of the Zionist entity, Israel listens. Israel believes this is an existential threat, which gets to the Begin Doctrine. Begin Doctrine was any nuclear country that could hit Israel, you must preempt. It's what Israel did in Osirak in 1981, and it's what it did for the North Korean reactor in Syria in 2007. And after speaking to many people in Israel over the years, Israel can and Israel will attack Iran if Iran gets to that threshold. So to determine if Israel will strike, the question has to be asked why Iran has enriched uranium to 20%. Is it simply for leverage to lift sanctions, or are they looking to get to a place that they can quickly, at a moment's notice, cross that threshold? And just to let you know, we talked about the next Palestinian leader. The Ayatollah is on his last leg. And so just giving you some ideas of some of the leading candidates, we have Ephraim Razi, who's a great resume, is about mass execution of political prisoners. And we also have the Ayatollah's son, who was in charge of the crackdown of the Green Revolution when millions of Iranians went into the streets in 2009 to protest against the regime. And to American discredit, we did not support the Iranian people then. And this is just a rogues gallery of some of the leading candidates for the next supreme leader. And by the way, whoever the Iranian president is, he does not call the shots. So what choices does the administration have in dealing with Iran? So one of the leading center-left journalists from Washington Post, David Ignatius, who's a very wise person, said, sometimes in life, the best thing to do about a problem is nothing, at least initially. As President-elect Joe Biden prepares to take office, that may be the best advice about the Middle East. Don't hurry to restart nuclear negotiations with Iran. And that is probably the important thing. Don't rush back to the JCPOA. But what Biden may be confronted with is the open account. The American and the Israeli assassinations, targeted assassinations. America last year of Qasem Soleimani, the world's leading terrorist, the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, and Israel's killing a few months ago of the leading nuclear scientist, Mohsen Farizadeh. These are going to be retribution. When will it occur? And how will the Biden administration respond? So the Biden administration needs to understand, and not enough people in Congress I talk to on both sides of the aisle don't realize why they want nuclear weapons. They don't necessarily want nuclear weapons to attack tomorrow Israel. What they want to do is to make themselves immune to regime change because they have nuclear weapons. So what should America's long-term goal be for Iran? Something I wrote about last year called non-kinetic regime change. This regime is not changing. Anybody who believes the regime is changing really doesn't understand the fundamental nature. That does not mean boots on the ground. This was something I took from the Kennedy School of Government about non-kinetic regime change. What it means is we have to do and support the Iranian people when they want to take over their country again. It's what we didn't do in the Green Revolution in 2009 during the Obama administration, but it's something I would hope the President Biden's administration, if confronted with the same situation, did. So down to our last two topics. Chinese hegemony in the Middle East. Gee, I didn't think I'd see China in what we're talking about here. China with Israel and the US is a big problem because Israel is getting close to China and is trying to balance a delicate dance between China and America. Israel's on a collision course because it's gotten so close to China, and because America views China as its primary strategic threat, and Israel's being asked to choose sides. So the Rand Institute said that China and Iran ties might require Chinese companies doing business in Israel to share their insights with the Iranian government. And just remember, the American national security strategy says that China is trying purposefully to hurt American interests around the world and to hurt American security. So that's why we in America want to pivot there, because China is our greatest security threat right now. Now, even Secretary of State Pompeo, who was considered incredibly friendly to Israel, said that unless Israel decreases its cooperation with China, U.S. might reduce intelligence sharing, co-location of security facilities. And I believe that whoever the new Secretary of State is, or the new Secretary of Defense, or it would be Tony Blinken, obviously, that they're going to challenge Israel about this. And this is all about China's brilliant Belt and Road Initiative, land and sea and cyber, to extend and project its influence throughout the Middle East. And just to give you an idea of some of the things that are happening. So China, going through Pakistan to the Arabian Sea, has developed a railway. Here's one going around Pakistan, part of their Belt and Road, goes through Afghanistan, Iran, and India. Look how they're trying to, through their Belt and Road, bring countries together that you wouldn't think under their influence. And they're making deals and offering loans that are tying them down that they're never going to be able to repay. So the American terms specifically with China and Israel are a Chinese control of the Haifa seaport, where our fleet, our Mediterranean fleet, docks. Chinese company is building the world's largest desalination plant in Israel. The China group is finalizing a deal for Tel Aviv's light rail. And America is worried about joint research of Chinese investment with Israel, technology companies that can use cybersecurity. And China has a digital Silk Road besides the Belt and Road, where they're rivaling America's GPS system and has also 37,000 miles of underground fiber cable. So the Chinese controlled technology companies can insert, and this is from the Council on Foreign Relations, can insert backdoor mechanisms for intelligence and propaganda in Belt and Road partner countries. Israel, in a way, is a Belt and Road partner country. And for just defending China here, why does China need to be so close to the Middle East and do these type of things? Because China receives over 40% of the oil and natural gas from the Gulf, and that doesn't include Iran. And so it has to project power there. So what Iran is doing is it's developing naval bases and ports in Pakistan, in Djibouti, and it's within striking distance in the Gulf of Hormuz. And here you can see where this is between the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea. On to our last topic, which is Israel's Iranian Northern Front, the next war. So I brought up Amos Yadlin, again, one of Israel's chief national security experts. He says we have to prepare for the first Northern War, not only against Hezbollah, but also in Syria with the Iranians in Syria, all along the Northern Front. And just to remind you, Iran and Hezbollah control the Bekaa Valley up in the north there. In Beirut, they have a command center, and all of southern Lebanon. And as far as their missiles, they have 150,000 missiles. Their missiles now could hit anywhere in Israel, including the Dimona nuclear reactor, could hit the Knesset, they could hit Azareli towers in Tel Aviv. That is what Israel continually hits in Syria and Lebanon and even Iraq, the transport of precision guidance missiles. And just give you an idea of the range of what they have. The first feud between Hezbollah and Israel may be over a disputed zone of Israel's natural gas. Lebanon also has natural gas reserves, and Israel was actually supposed to have a dialogue with Lebanon, which Lebanon backed out of because Hezbollah controls Lebanon. And so that is a real problem. And this is, so Israel has actually brought a whole group of naval vessels from frigates from Germany, specifically to protect the Tamar and Leviathan gas areas. And last, so I want to mention one of the organizations, if you want lots of research and knowing what's going on in the North, I work with something called the Alma Research Center, which is my friend, Colonel Sarit Zahavi. And she has done amazing work on Hezbollah and Iran in southern Syria. So if you look at this map, in the middle, you can see where it says Golan Heights. Just to the right of it is the border with Syria. And all those little squares, that's basically Iran and Hezbollah having bases right on Israel's border. Remember what I said below in Jordan? Can you imagine all of that along Israel down there towards the Jordan River Valley? And so they are called the Southern Command and the Golan File. And these are Hezbollah and Iranian revolutionary controlled infrastructures that are gathering intelligence on Israel and preparing for future terrorist attacks and working with local Syrians. And there's just many of these things that have been documented. And up in, just to know, but Hezbollah, they are about human shields. They have also through Alma documented so many missiles hidden in people's homes or near civilian structures. So when Israel has to eventually respond in a northern war, the human shields in Israel is going to be saying Israel's going to be blamed for war crimes. And these are all the things, and there's literally hundreds of them. And my friend, this is my friend Sarit Zahava with my friend Grace Meng, Democratic Congresswoman. Just took a couple of pictures when I bring her to Washington to do briefings there. There's a picture with Tom Cotton and there's many others that we have. And this is us giving a briefing to House foreign aides. So I am done now. Please take a moment if you would like to write to me. It's ermandelmd@gmail. And you could sign up for my MEPA newsletters. I'd be happy to send them to you. We've spoken almost an hour at this point, and I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your questions, to send them in to Alan and Jonathan. And I think I'm going to stop sharing the screen at this point. And so I'm going to hand this back to Alan and Jonathan and be happy for some questions.
Thank you. I have received a few questions, but please, everybody, if you did not get the message, please use your chat capabilities and send me any and all of your questions, and I'll process them. First question, Eric, is the Biden team too intent to reversing what Trump did without making a better deal? Who will be invested in negotiating a better deal? Preventing Iran from ever developing a nuclear bomb, ?
Okay, so the question here is, and I say this as hopefully not a partisan, if we re-enter the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, as it is, over time, Iran can legally have, with international approval, an industrial-sized nuclear weapons production system. And I feel totally confident saying that. So when people say that the JCPOA will stop Iran from having a nuclear weapon system, it's only true because if you believe it in the next 10 years or 8 years, it's actually less, it depends upon where the timelines come back. This does not, as promised, stop them having that potential, which they should never have had in the first place as a terrorist state. I am cautiously optimistic that the Biden administration will not want to deal so much and will, without giving credit to the maximum sanctions that are there, and Iran is hurting. I am hoping that they will, before re-entering the deal, change the deal. The deal has to be changed because they need to incorporate ballistic missiles. They need to have some way to modify their hegemonic ambitions. The administration has said already that this is only a nuclear deal, and we will not have any sanctions related to a nuclear deal. This is all we're negotiating. But the last administration, and many people are the same people from there, promised that there would be sanctions for their other malevolent behavior on human rights, on taking over Syria, or what they did in Iraq, all these other things that they did, except that in fear that Iran would pull out of the JCPOA, there never were any sanctions. So if I had an opportunity to speak to them, I would say, do not go back into a deal, and not just with some window dressing. They would not go back and deal that unless it actually ends the Iranian nuclear program. And to believe that the Iranians are going to respect the JCPOA or the JCPOA plus, as some people are referring to it, I wouldn't count on it. And the reason I'll tell you this is when the JCPOA was done, there was a companion document called the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2231 that was supposed to be the international document that solidified this. Remember, the JCPOA was never signed. It was never sent as a treaty to the United States Senate. And so what the Iranians said was, we respect the JCPOA, we do not respect 2231, which was all the more onerous things that were hidden within it. So in our hyper-political echo chambers that we're all in, one way or another, people make claims that the Biden administration will not, if it goes into the JCPOA, which it wants to, it will not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. It just doesn't fit. I'm really hoping that they can take leverage. I have no objection to go into another deal. That would be wonderful, but it's got to be one that ends their nuclear program, and they've got to begin to address all of their other malevolent behaviors. And they are an existential threat. By the way, if they don't, this increases the chances of war in the future. Israel will strike.
Eric, what is your sense, and you have a pulse of sorts on Congress, what is your sense of the incoming Congress thoughts regarding the JCPOA and other issues of concern to Israel?
I think it's all lining up politically, which is why I asked those questions of Greg Meeks and Brad Sherman. I think there were people who voted against the JCPOA, but remember, it was brilliantly manufactured in 2015, where it should have had to go to the Senate for a vote as a treaty, but it actually was able to pass with 42 senators as a minority. So at this point, you had people who voted against it. This will not be voted on again. And there were people who voted against it last time, like Chuck Schumer and a number, and our former Congresswoman Nita Lowey, against it, but it didn't really matter. Going forward at this point, we're in a much worse place. And I think I don't think enough people really understand the deal, what it is, the implications, and it's almost just a political fight. And I look at it, I care about American national security interests, and I also care about Israeli national security interests. The current deal, going back to it without major changes, increases the chances of a war between Israel and Iran. The Congress, what they think, I think they're going to just go into their corners, and there will be a couple of people that will try to show bipartisanship, but I don't see a healthy dialogue happening about this going forward, unfortunately.
We have two questions that are related. One is, what do you think the greatest threat to the Iranian regime is now? And I'll segue to the next question, and for the foreseeable future. The second question is, do you see a scenario in the next 5 to 7 years in which the threat faced by Arab states from the Iranian regime recedes, and this impetus for the deals that were struck with Israel no longer obtains, and that the reconciliation or normalization stalls?
So we'll take the second part of the question first of all. Is normalization inevitable? No. 20 years ago, in 9/11, 2001, Saudi Arabia was the boogeyman, and now we think they may be, and we're encouraging them to make nice with Israel. Things change in the Middle East Even though things, as I said, go in centuries how they think, they also can change quickly. So will the Arabs make a deal with Iran? If they feel that America has abandoned them, if they feel Russia is a better friend, if they feel they need it to survive, will they make a deal with Iran to survive? Yeah, I think they would. So that's why America really needs to take advantage of these normalization agreements, because it is in our interest not to let Iran basically control the Middle East. So that was, what was the first question, Alan? I'm sorry.
What is the near term, in the near term, what's the greatest threat to the Iranian regime?
The Iranian people. And that's something we really, listen, many of us know that the Iranian people are probably the people themselves are the most westernized people that are out there in the Middle East. They're not Arabs. There's actually, Persians only represent about 55% of them. There's lots of minorities who are very upset with the Iranian regime and its authoritarian ways and its lack of human rights. So and I hope, because this administration will be different than the Obama administration and respect the human rights of the Iranian people, if and when, and I think it's just a matter of when, they speak up again, that we should support their desire for regime change. We didn't support the Iranian people in 2009, which was a mistake, and we did support the Egyptian people to overthrow Mubarak, which had some negative consequences because the Muslim Brotherhood came in until there was the coup where Sisi came in. So it's up to the Iranian people, and we should be there for them. We are not changing the spots of the leopard on Iran. They are a revolutionary, political Islamist area of people that doesn't represent all the Iranian people. We want the Iranian people to take their country back.
Eric, you touched on this issue. I wish that you could speak to it a little bit more. You said that there is no truth to the story that Iran never wanted a bomb. What I understand from what little reading that I've done on this is that even those who know deep down they want the bomb, as a practical matter, they're not daring to actually build one, but want to get very, very close so they can push a button and be there within 30 days or whatever it takes. What is the nuance here, and what are the implications of that difference?
Well, it's, used to say that they would put everything together until the last screw was not tightened. And so they never, quote, crossed the threshold of what it is. So what I was saying before is the absconded archives in Tehran proved, going well back into the 90s and before, and really right up to the early 2000s, and that's absolute proof that they always wanted a nuclear weapon. They told the world something different. If they want, it's just very clear. If there is, the Ayatollah has a fatwa that says it is against Islam to have a nuclear weapon. If you have a fatwa against that, then you would not be threatening to go to 90% enrichment. You would not be developing ballistic missiles that can deliver this. You would not, be saying that you're going to wipe Israel off the map many different times. You would not be have weaponization in Parshan and developing this latest thing of uranium metals, which have no civilian use, as the Europeans said this week. So, anybody who believes that, I have a bridge, across the Euphrates to sell them in Tehran. They definitely would like a better weapon. What they want, again, is to become immune to attack. Their first priority is to remain in power. And if they have a nuclear weapon, they believe no outside force would dare come to them. And they learned from the North Koreans. The North Koreans, nobody's going in there and overthrowing them because they could use a nuclear weapon. Iran would like to be that. And Henry Kissinger is right. If Iran really gets close, they don't need to go all the way close. Saudi Arabia has always said it has a secret deal with Pakistan, and other countries can buy nuclear weapons. You could just buy a nuclear weapon and buy the delivery system. You don't even have to create them. So this area can go out of control as a nuclear area. We would think it will look like Pakistan and India as a quiet region.
Hello, this is Helene Schoenbrunn. I'm going to interrupt for a minute. It seems that some people are not able to chat Alan. with questions. So I've asked people in the chat if you can please raise your hand. I have a few questions from people, so I will call your name and unmute you, and you can ask your question directly. The first person is Jeff Daub. If you can unmute.
Okay. Eric?
Is this Jeff from ZOA in Israel?
Yes, it is. Hi, Eric. How you doing?
Good. I'm jealous that you're in Israel. What's the answer for you?
So just a quick question. What do you believe the significance of Israel's recent inclusion in CENTCOM is for Israel?
Well, it makes total sense. Israel's in the Middle East. America and Israel are the closest allies of one another there. I think the fact that it is there, it speaks volumes to the importance of the normalization agreements. This would never have happened a year ago before normalization. There would have been squawking from the Saudis and UAE and Bahrain, even though they didn't have a problem with Israel, that to have allowed them in there. And even if they would have allowed them, the Americans were very sensitive to allowing them in. So I think the idea that Israel's in there, and hopefully the Biden administration will allow them to remain in there, I think it shows that the joint cooperation now between America, Israel, and the Gulf states is creating a joint defense against Iran. Will this be continued by the Biden administration? I don't know. Biden administration, and we should always want diplomacy first if we can have that. But if you don't have in this part of the world a credible military option and coming together for strength, and I think that's what this is. This is a message to the Iranians.
Okay, great, thank you. Next, Dean Unger, you're welcome to ask your question.
Okay, hi, Eric.
Dean.
Nice to see you. Just, you showed that really nice, not nice, but that map of the Syrian border with all the Iranian bases. How long does that how long can that status quo hold? And what do you think is going to make it untenable?
Well, Iran, remember, Iran controls Hezbollah. Iran has tremendous powers in Syria. Remember, many of the people that Iran controls in Syria are popular mobilization units that are Afghani, Pakistani, Iraqi. It's not just Hezbollah and Iranian groups that are there. They are patient. They are going to build this up. They're looking for their opportunities. I believe their major opportunity is looking at a fragile Jordan and looking for it to topple and chaos and to have influence in Jordan the way it has in Iraq and the way it has in Lebanon and in Syria. And I think that's where the next place that they're going. I've been to Jordan. I've spoken to people. That's really where I'm very worried. So they're going to continually add there. Israel is not striking each one of those bases. They're there. And by the way, these were all open sourced. You could find all of these bases. They're forgetting about the hidden ones. So this is a huge problem, and it's going to continue to grow. Israel has only struck the last 200 times about precision-guided, game-changing munitions and missiles. It hasn't, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's headquarters, it hasn't hit, although there was a major hit on the Syrian-Iraqi border in the last week, if you noticed. So the question is, when will that lead to something that might spiral out of control and all of a sudden ignite into a war? It could happen at any time. And Israel has been on pins and needles in the north about what's going on. But they're growing, they're building up, and this is not stopping. But this could be quiet for a few years. They'll wait their time.
Great, thanks.
The next person, Cyrus Golzaz. Are you here?
Hi.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I guess I had a question about Iran and nuclear weapons. And I was wondering, is it possible that Iran would try to build a higher grade nuclear weapon for themselves and a lower grade one for their allies, and try to attack Israel as a proxy? So let's say through Lebanon, let's say Hezbollah has a lower grade one. so that if Israel reacts, they'll react not on Iran, but on a proxy. But Iran's nuclear grade weapon would be scary enough that Israel would not react on Iran directly.
Well, I think the first point we want to make here is about proxies. You know, there are proxies and there are proxies. You know, Hezbollah, for example, is Iran. It is like a brigade, a battalion of Iran. They follow because they follow the supreme leader. I think it's called Fatih al-Faqih, which is basically whoever the supreme leader is, we follow you if you're a Shiite. And so they follow, there's no independence there. If the supreme leader told the leader of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, I'm sending you a nuclear weapon, a missile, and I want you to shoot it at Israel, would it do it? Unhesitant. Even if Israel responded and destroyed Lebanon, it would do it. I mean, to that level, do they follow what Iran says? It's really one and in the same. Again, I think Iran wants to, is talking about to Alan was saying before, is fear. They want to become immune to being attacked. They want nuclear weapons in order to intimidate their Arab Sunni allies. They wanted to take over. They want to intimidate Israel. They want, listen, they don't want to shoot their nuclear weapon if they did shoot it. And I don't think that's what they're looking to do. I think they just want the nuclear weapons or the ability to be close to it, and people fear that they have it. They want Mecca and Medina in Saudi Arabia before, and there goes to 1.0, Sunni versus Shiite. They want that before they destroyed Israel. They'll do this in a long, painstaking way to do that. But you think about the strike of cruise missiles that was incredibly sophisticated, that went from Iran, although they claimed it was from Yemen, that hit the Saudi oil facilities and shut down half of Saudi oil production last year. They have the ability through proxies to hide it, whether it's coming from Iraq, Yemen, Syria, or from themselves, to make something happen. I'm actually not worried about a nuclear weapon at this time. I'm worried about their ability to get close to a nuclear weapon that will change everything. But using proxies is, it can, is their MO.
Erica Newman, do you have a question?
You have to unmute yourself, Erica.
I'm looking for Erica to see if.
Nope, she's still muted. You have Joe Gill, he's looking to he's raising his hand. Maybe we could just go there.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't unmute. It kept giving me an error that the host had to unmute me. But my question is, how do you see the upcoming, yet again, elections in Israel impacting the U.S.-Israel relationship?
Yes, the fourth election in less than 2 years. Different players now. Last time you had a coalition coming together that was center left with Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid. And now you have one that looks like it's going to be to the right of Bibi Netanyahu, with Bennett and Gideon Sa'ar. I don't know, how this is going to come out. I'm not optimistic. But I know one thing, when you have multiple elections like this in a dysfunctional parliamentary system like Israel have, that has existential threats, this is not good for the country. Bibi is also facing the corruption charges. He's been able to put them off for a while. The difference between being indicted and convicted, but more and more of his allies, or certainly people who were his allies, but and politically simpatico about him, but feel that he is, outlived his usefulness because he's become, for lack of a better word, a real politician or corrupt, that there are people who should replace him. And that's putting nothing down on the positive things that he's done about normalization, but he's become a divisive figure in Israel. So there's going to be elections there. I think, if anything, the fact that there's going to be elections may delay the conflict between the Biden administration and Netanyahu at this point, because Netanyahu is going to become more, if you will, aggressive about things like settlements, just to show his bona fides against Bennett and Gideon Sa'ar, to show that he's more right than they are. And so the only thing is that there's, because an election's coming up, the Biden administration may give them a little more of a pass, because who are they going to be speaking with? They don't know. And if this is going to continue with these caretaker administrations, I don't know. I have to tell you, I thought after the last time when I was on television a lot talking about this, I said, thank God this is finally over. And it's like, you know, this is Groundhog Day in Israel.
One related question to this, as a practical matter, are there differences between the left and the right in Israel over how to deal with the Iranian threat? What difference does it make which party gets elected?
It's a very good question. I don't think Americans understand enough that the vast majority of Israelis and of Israelis of the center left and the center right in regard to Iran are really simpatico about that. And I believe that a Gantz or Saar or Netanyahu or Lapid would, if they felt that they were at a threshold, all would attack Iran. I really believe that. So there is not that much difference. The problem is that the journalists that go over to Israel and the Americans who read here, they read Haaretz, which is unrepresentative of the vast majority of Israelis. That doesn't make it right or wrong. It makes it just not how Israelis think about it. So so there really isn't a difference. And one of the ways that Israel changed was we got to go back 20 years, the Second Intifada, 21 years now. The left moved hard to the right. Certainly the left moved to the center and the center moved to the right, whether it was on the Palestinians and on other issues. It's one of the few countries where young people are more conservative than the older generations. But from an Israeli point of view, which is a survival point of view, when you're talking about external enemies, I think there's only maybe Meretz, a small group, would not preemptively attack Iran if they thought they were going across the nuclear threshold.
In your opinion, based on your conversations with the Israeli security establishment, is Israel prepared for the next war?
Yes, they can do it and they will do it. And you just saw recently, I believe it was in Natanz, that there was an explosion and set back some of their work there. Some people say 2 years. We had 10 years ago, we had Stuttniks. It doesn't necessarily need to be kinetic. It doesn't necessarily need to be a strike. Obviously, you've had the targeted assassinations, but ultimately, striking the facilities will almost definitely need something beyond cyber to strike. Would America be an ally or somebody trying to hinder Israel from doing that? And if the American government says this can go out of control and we can control Iran as we did with mutually assured destruction with Russia, big difference. Russia cared that if they were going to be totally destroyed, that was a different type of authoritarian regime of communist Russia. The Iranians have a different type of mindset of what they are and what some of their goals are. It's not analogous to that. So, this is a real problem. I think the administration, our new administration coming in, really needs to think about the decisions they make. Could it push Israel to strike sooner than it would because they don't feel that all of their existential security needs are being addressed?
Okay, I see 2 more questions and then we're going to wrap it up. The first person to please unmute yourself, Rabbi Michael J. Please ask your question.
Good evening, Dr. Mandel, and hello from Jersey.
Hello.
Thank you so much for always keeping us informed as you do. So I'm going to go backwards a little bit, back to JCPOA and to the Abraham Accords. And I have to ask you a question. In our hyper-partisan world here in the States, do our representatives really care what we call them and tell them or what we email them on these issues?
They do. When you call up and many organizations do this. They give a phone number, you call. I've witnessed it innumerable times, and they say, we'll pass it on whatever issue you're talking about, for Iran, against Iran, whatever we're talking about. and they count them up. And they'll, it will get back through the chief of staff to the member of Congress, or, the senator or the House. We got 700 calls today, that said, don't sign on to the JCPOA. These things actually do make a difference. In the world of COVID, this pandemic is, that's your only voice. Other times, it's obviously good if you can get meetings locally or go to Washington, to address these issues. My only advice is that when you do these things, be laser focused. Only address one issue. And again, if you, as groups, communities, want to reach out, that's what the wonderful thing about our republic is. They do listen. How much do they act upon what you say? They all want to be reelected. And so if they feel that something is so important to a community, a pro-Israel community, that something being done, it will reverberate. They will respond. Will it change how they vote? Maybe yes, maybe no, probably no. But it is definitely worthwhile, and come together in groups. That's what lobbying is. That, lobbying has a negative name to it, but that's what people should do. What I do in Congress is brief, but people like you should be lobbying your congressmen and their chiefs of staff and their foreign policy people about the issues you care about, and come together as communities. And so I think it's good. That's what I love about our country. We can have a difference, and don't give up. I am cautiously optimistic about where we're going to go with this country. We're at a bottom, and we're going to get better. And this is one of the ways we get better. We speak up.
Thank you again, and stay safe and healthy, please.
And Judith Darsky, can you unmute yourself and ask Eric a question?
Okay, I'm unmuted. Hi, thank you for doing this. Years ago, I was told that in our State Department, or in whatever agencies is supposed to be dealing with foreign policy regarding Iran, they didn't have enough people who spoke adequate Farsi, Persian. And I remember thinking at the time that there are so many young Jewish people in our communities here in Brooklyn and Los Angeles and so on, who are native Farsi speakers. And whoever it was I was speaking to at the time, I don't remember who it was anymore, said that the State Department and these other governmental agencies in the United States won't hire Jews for those jobs because they think that they're not going to be, that they won't, that they're too Jewish, that they won't be objective enough, I guess is the word.
I heard the same things. I haven't heard it recently. I heard the same things a few years ago. Even though I work in state and I have my problems state, it may be true, and I really don't have firsthand knowledge of that. When I read it, I was concerned, and I was hoping it wasn't true. But I don't have firsthand knowledge of that, right now. I'm happy to take another question.
Oh, I would love to know the update.
Eric, before we sign off, would you be kind enough to tell the audience how we can get your newsletter, how we can be in contact with you?
Okay, let me just pop that up.
You have an audience for your voice.
I appreciate that. Did this pop up?
Yes, thank you.
All right, so please, by the way, if anybody wanted, any individual slides, there's some that are proprietary, some not, I'd be happy to send them. If you have a question, I'm happy. If there's other places you'd like me to speak, I'm happy to. I really want to hear your comments about what you think, what your community thinks, and I really am happy to hopefully be a source. So you're not bothering me if you reach out to me. I do the best I can, and you can try me. That's my personal email address. So I'll let you pop back there.
Thank you. This has been a wonderful evening. Thank you very much, Eric. I want to thank my co-chair of the Israel Action Committee of the 5 Synagogues, Jonathan Flaxer. And of course, I have to thank our co-sponsors tonight, the Westchester Jewish Council. I saw Eric Forsheimer in and out today. He had the multiple programs. I want to thank Pam Goldstein and of course, Helene Schoenbrum, who hosted with me tonight's event. I believe I also saw, let's see if he's still here. I can't tell, but I saw Danny Schultz, who heads up the Israel Action Committee for the Westchester Jewish Council. So this was truly a group effort chosen by the audience. Eric has been our first of the Israel Action Committee 5 Synagogues, first speaker in as many years going back as I can recall, but the audience tonight was much greater, and I attribute that to the cooperation of the Westchester Jewish Council. Thank you again. Thank you everybody who participated for tuning in, and we'll see you again.